So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President Lincoln used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the live free or die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though, that this president...
It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress.
If you're wondering why Republicans are so hell-bent on breaking the law, it's because apparently they have no idea what the law actually says. Here, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristie Noem, exposes the reality that she is either ignorant about the Constitution or willfully choosing to ignore its plain text out of convenience. Either way, it is wholly and completely disqualifying. And yet, for Donald Trump, that's the job. It's to humiliate yourself, to debase yourself on behalf of the God King. If you're not throwing yourself in the line of fire, if you're not throwing yourself on the grenade for an autocratic ruler, then you're not fulfilling the principal function of your job, which is to normalize his dangerous behavior on his behalf. This should be the end of Noem's political career. Instead, because she works for Trump, she will fail up as the result of it. In fact, she was pressed even further on this issue. Here's how that went.
I wanted to just go back to something that was raised earlier about habeas corpus. Can you confirm to us that you understand that any suspension of habeas corpus requires an act of Congress?
President Lincoln executed habeas corpus in the past with retroactive action by Congress. I believe that any president that was able to do that in the past, it should be afforded to our current day president. This president has never said he's going to do this. He's never communicated to me or his administration that they're going to consider suspending habeas corpus, but I do think the Constitution allows them the right to consider it.
When we saw what happened with, how many times has habeas corpus been suspended in our country?
Once that I know of.
4 times.
For certain. I'm not certain if those were...
The instance that you were referring to was one where the courts subsequently showed that Congress is the one that has the ability. Do you know what section of the Constitution the suspension clause of habeas corpus is in?
I do not. Nope.
Do you know which article it is in?
No, I do not, sir.
Okay, well, it is in Article 1. Do you know which branch of government Article 1 outlines the tasks and the responsibilities for?
Yes.
Which one?
Congress.
Yes.
And therein lies the fundamental problem here. Kristie Noem thinks that habeas corpus is a power vested with the executive branch. It's not. It is a power vested with Congress, the legislative branch, as a check on the executive branch. Here's Mark Elias outlining that point brilliantly.
The writ of habeas corpus can only be suspended when there is a rebellion or invasion, and this is the key, Brian, and, quote, the public safety may require it. So it is not enough even that there is an invasion or a rebellion. It is an invasion and a rebellion that is so dangerous to public safety that it requires the suspension of habeas corpus. Whatever one may think about the woman and the other students at Tufts and elsewhere who were rounded up and thrown into, into a prison in Louisiana, they pose no risk to public safety, right? I mean, the woman was walking down the street when she was dragged off. She wasn't a threat to public safety. So there is no basis upon which to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. And one more thing, Brian. And it is Congress that has the right to suspend habeas corpus, not the president. So even when you have the suspension of habeas corpus, it requires an act of Congress because they are the ones who suspend the Great Writ. The Great Writ exists to cabin, to limit the power of a king. That's why you had a writ of habeas corpus. That's why the founders wanted the writ of habeas corpus to be the default in this country and could only be suspended under very limited circumstances, because they had lived under a king. And it is the reason why Congress, not the president, suspends habeas corpus.
Right. That's the whole point of not having it in the executive branch, is because the point of having habeas corpus is to limit the power of the executive or the king in the case of Great Britain.
Correct, since it's a limitation on the executive branch imprisoning people.
In other words, it's not Trump's power to wield. It is a power wielded against Trump, against the president, against the executive branch. That's like if you get pulled over by a cop for speeding and you try to arrest the cop. It might feel convenient in the moment, but you don't get to reverse the roles just because you want to. When a power exists to act as a check on somebody else's abuses, they don't get to simply co-opt that power for themselves. But I think the most important point is the fact that this principle, habeas corpus, is what sets us apart from the vile dictatorships around the world. The fact that we can't disappear people with no due process is not a liability, it is an asset. It's the greatest asset we have. It's what makes us a nation of laws. And it's the greatest irony and tragedy that a president who spent years and years and years beating his chest as the law and order candidate from a party that beats its chest as the law and order party is now the one undermining that very principle. The sad reality is that we're at the precipice right now of losing our democracy, but we haven't yet, and we don't have to. That means we call this out every single fucking day. It means we educate people on what habeas corpus actually is, because Republicans purposefully choose obscure terms that they know people don't inherently understand. But while their strategy relies on assuming people are stupid, ours doesn't. It is our job to tell people the truth, explain why it's important, how it's going to impact them, and why they should care. And on this issue, above all other issues, they should care. Which means that we beat the drum every single day and we don't let up until these anti-democratic ghouls are out of office and as far from the levers of power as possible. Before you go, if you enjoyed this content and you want to see more and support independent media, please subscribe to this channel. The subscribe button will be right here on the screen. But second, the reality is that we are now in a political environment where this administration can lean on any of the social media platforms to suppress certain voices if they don't like critical coverage. That means my longevity here is in the hands of a few tech billionaires who are already making it clear that they are willing to cater to this administration. To that end, signing up for my newsletter is a way for me to reach you directly if that ever becomes necessary. I'll put the link right here on the screen as well, so please sign up. It's free, but there's also an option to do a paid subscription if you'd like to support me and my team. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching.